You drive up that grade and up through Morongo Valley into Yucca, and it just feels like you're climbing out of the smog, and then you like get to this hilltop, and it's just this pureness.
Welcome to the Desert Lady Diaries podcast, conversations with women who have found their home in the Mojave Desert. I'm Dawn Davis, and this is episode 148. Find out more about the podcast at desertladydiaries.com and engage with the guests, other listeners, or me on Facebook and Instagram at Desert Lady Diaries. And if you do all your audio listening through Pandora, you'll now find the Desert Lady Diaries podcast there as well.
Lauren Kane Lysak is a lifelong Southern California native. Her background is in the arts, animal husbandry, and in death care, where her business and passion, Precious Creature, melds the three together to bring a renewed vision to pet loss and memorialization. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Dawn. Thank you for having me. I've been a listener for a long time, so it's cool to be here.
Thank you. I appreciate that. If you're a longtime listener, you know the first question I always ask is, what was your first experience with desert?
My first experience with the desert probably goes back to, when I was 7, 8, 9 years old. We have a family friend that lives in Pioneer Town. And so I grew up visiting them a lot on their ranch. And so that was really my first experience with the desert. But from there, we also used to come out to Joshua Tree National Park a lot too. So for family day trips, it was someplace that we frequented a lot. And, I grew up just an hour away. So it was always a quick, easy trip to get away from the suburbs and get some outdoor time to hike and to see the sights. It's just such a beautiful place.
Did you find after those family trips that you came out on your own ever after that and kind of continued that tradition, if you will?
Absolutely. Yeah. I met my boyfriend at the time, now my husband, and I think our first ever camping trip we took together was in Joshua Tree. So that was, almost 12 years ago now. So wow. It's a place we've been coming to on our own too. And when it came time for us to look into buying a home and I needed to expand my studio space, the desert was our first pick for the natural beauty as well as the affordability of the area.
Do you remember on any of those earlier trips, like as a kid to Pioneer Town or into the park, anything that you found special or unique specifically?
You drive up that grade and up through Morongo Valley into Yucca, and it just feels like you're climbing out of the smog, and then you get to this hilltop, and it's just this pureness. And that always stuck with me, and just how clean everything felt. Even the roads, I'm like, there's hardly any trash. So, but now that I live here, now I'm starting to see, getting used to it. And now I'm starting to see when people leave, that people dump all their stuff on the trails, and it's really unfortunate. But
yeah, and that's an important point to make to someone who's listening and comes out here and visits, that it's really important that they pack out what they pack in. Sometimes what they leave behind is dangerous for the natural wildlife and the ecosystem. And it really helps when they do that. Though we have a couple of organizations that walk up and down the highway and do that, or Colin Sauter and his Desert Cleanse project, that they go out and do really big cleanups of tires and things like that. But
that's cool.
Yeah, that's really great.
Yeah.
That they do.
Yeah,
that.
I didn't even know that they had that. There's definitely some parts of the highway I'm like, this needs some TLC, but yeah, coming out, it was always kind of this magical experience, and seeing the stars. I grew up in Redlands, so in the Inland Empire. If you don't know, Redlands is it's situated right in between LA and Palm Springs. So we grew up kind of going to LA for day trips and going out to Palm Springs, and then the high desert too, which is usually where we ended up. And it just became home. Just became this place where I was gravitated to.
So at what point, you said you had met your now husband, and then you all said, you know what, we need to expand, and you started looking out here. Talk about what that process was like for you, and how long did it take from the moment you said, you know what, I think we should move there, and then actually being here?
Yeah, so we had plans pretty early on, knowing that as soon as he was able to get a job in the low desert, that we would relocate. So it's just a matter of waiting for something to open up in food and agriculture where he is based. And then as soon as that happened, it happened really fast. I think we started looking for a house This was January, February of 2018, we started looking, and then we were here in the desert by June. So it was pretty quick, but we needed to go because we had just gotten our new puppy, and we were in a 2-bedroom apartment, and the other bedroom was my studio. So I had all my freezers in this little room in an apartment. My workshop was in this bedroom of the apartment, and it was just way too cramped. And it was just, it happened at perfect timing. We had to get out of there, and we weren't even allowed to have the second puppy. So we had to keep him a secret for a while.
All right. Where were you then when all this was happening?
Where we were living in Yucaipa. So pretty close to Redlands. It's just right over there, kind of nestled in between those little suburbs.
Yeah. What was the process? Well, you said it happened really quickly, and then you just packed up your things and came out and got settled.
Yeah, pretty much. It was just go, go, go. Mm-hmm. And now that we're here, now we kind of moved into a little neighborhood. But now, of course, when we get here, we're like, oh, we need a desert view. Like I want to see this place. And so sometimes it kind of is disheartening. We look out the windows and like, I want to see open desert, and we just see like the neighbors' houses. But
right.
So we hope to eventually move again, maybe within the next couple of years, to someplace with a little bit more space, at least one view. And I want to make a beautiful environment for my clients as well. So that's really important to me.
Yeah. Let's talk about that a little bit. So you're in the business of basically pet taxidermy, but also a very gentle process of allowing people to maintain the memory of a beloved pet, essentially.
Yes.
How did that start for you?
Well, I started practicing taxidermy, the art and craft of taxidermy, in spring of 2011. And at that time, I was working and volunteering at the San Bernardino County Natural History Museum, which is in Redlands. It's actually a really, really great, underrated museum. They have wonderful taxidermy exhibits of both mammals and birds. And most of their collection has been put away, but they used to boast, I believe, I think this is correct, but I believe it's the second largest bird egg collection in the world.
Wow.
Is housed, right over here in San Bernardino. And they took a lot of it down, and it's not on display anymore. So I was working and volunteering at the museum, and that is where I met a bird taxidermist. And when I met her, I had been working with her for a few months already. And then she just kind of told me that, oh yeah, I preserved that owl over there in the corner. And I go, what? You preserved a dead owl? She goes, yeah, I taxidermied it. I taxidermied a few of the birds in the bird hall. And I was just completely entranced. And I wanted to know everything about taxidermy. How do you preserve something that's dead? How do you keep it from decaying? Just completely entranced. And so I asked, can I learn? Like, how do you get started, or what's the process like? So she gave me a very basic rundown and said, if you're interested, just get a book and start studying. And that's what I did. Like that weekend, I think I went home and told my parents that I wanted to start practicing taxidermy, and they all looked at me like I was weird. And I slowly just started collecting the supplies and the book and started learning about it. And I finally, that spring is when I picked up taxidermy for the first time. And luckily my grandfather was very kind to let me loan his freezer to keep the dead bird inside of, as well as to use his garage as a workshop for this very first project. So I got to work. And the first bird probably took me a whole day. I think it probably took me about 8 hours to get this little bird done. And at the end, it looked somewhat like a bird, which I thought was an achievement. And it didn't fall prey to decay. And so to me, that was success. The fact that it didn't rot, and I was able to just preserve this thing that was alive, and the feathers didn't fall out, and it was fixed. So from there, it just for this complete passion and interest that I haven't been able to shake. It's become my life.
I want to back up a little bit, because I read that you also in high school, you had a job with a mortuary.
Yeah, so in high school, I was pretty certain that I wanted to be a funeral director or an embalmer or both. And so after high school, I had the opportunity to work at a funeral home in my town. And I worked there for a little bit under a year. And it was there that I decided, maybe this isn't what I want to do.
Why was
Because
that?
it was very strict. It was very traditional. If I ever had any, ideas or if I wanted to do something a little differently, they were very much against that. So to be honest, it was kind of a misogynistic environment. And there was comments like, oh, you can't do that kind of heavy man lifting work with the bodies. And it just really turned me off. I was mostly working in the office, and I also helped with everything else. So sometimes there would be a service and we would have a body set up in the funeral parlor, and I would kind of greet people as they came in, or if a body needed a makeup touch up or hair touch up, I would always make sure everything looked beautiful before the family came in. So that was the part of the work that I really enjoyed, was helping the grieving families. And I didn't get much of that working at the funeral home, but I knew in my heart that's what I really wanted to do, and that's what made me happy. So that always stuck with me, and I always had this pull, like I really want to work with grieving people, I really want to work in death care. So that always stuck. And when I got into taxidermy, it wasn't very long after that I thought, oh my gosh, like I could offer this to families. I could offer these services to grieving pet owners and try to make a better outcome to a horrible situation, to somebody's, frankly, some people's most terrible days are when their animals pass. And so if I'm able to uplift them or guide them through that, that's what really makes me glow inside.
What do you think it was that inspired you in the first place to move into that funeral mortuary kind of death place?
It's always been with me. All I can say is that there's always been this interest and fascination with the next stage, what comes after. And frankly, a deathly fear of dying. And from a very young age, I've had anxiety related to death and health. So when I was 5, I had my first panic attack, and it was related to mortality. And that's always stuck with me. I've had, just a few months ago, I was at 2 urgent cares. I almost went to the ER because I thought I was having a heart attack. It's anxiety. So it's something that I'm still learning to live with and deal with. And it's like a lifelong becoming comfortable with your mortality. And I feel like I'm still working through that, but it's getting better.
Yeah. I'm no psychologist, but I would also say you're a sensitive person.
I've been told that.
Yeah. Like you feel a lot of other people's feelings, very highly empathic. And I think you'd have to be in that line of work on the human side, but even more on the pet side, because it is probably something that some people would see and be a little put off by. I don't know if that makes sense. So when you decided that this was something that you could do for people with their pets, how did you go about creating the business?
Well, it took a long time. I started practicing taxidermy during my first year of college, where I was, my major was in studio art. So I was mainly focused on painting and sculpture at the time, but luckily I had professors that were willing to work with me, and they knew how much I was into taxidermy. So they allowed me to incorporate taxidermy into probably almost all of my pieces had some kind of taxidermy or bone element to it. So it started out, it was kind of more in the art world. And after I graduated, and a little bit before then, is when I started doing work with galleries. So there was a show at La Luz de Jesus in Hollywood called Rogue Taxidermy. And I was very lucky to be a part of that show for 2 years. It's a really awesome show with tons of, they call them rogue taxidermists. So it's not your traditional deer on the wall kind of taxidermy. It's very artful and unique and unexpected ways of using taxidermy in art.
When someone loses their pet and they have this in mind, they know that this is a service that is available. What are some of the things, or even someone listening now who realizes that they can do this, what are some of the things they need to do to prepare, is there anything they need to do to prepare the pet for that sort of thing?
Yeah, the big important part, the most important aspect, if you're interested in any kind of alternative aftercare, is to make sure that your pet is frozen in any standard freezer, usually within 2 to 3 hours after their death. So I always tell clients that if you want to spend some time with them and if you want to set up a photo shoot, you can put flowers around them and kind of make sort of a ceremony before placing them in the freezer, because the act of placing your pet in the freezer can be very harrowing. And it's that last kind of like, for one, it's a strange feeling to be putting your animal in a freezer. And then on top of that, it's the closing of this door. And it's so hard for people to do. So I'll tell people if they want to wrap their loved one in a shroud with flowers, with their favorite treats or their favorite toy, things like that really help to bring comfort. And the cool thing about freezing, though, is that your pet will stay perfectly safe in a freezer while arrangements are being made and for much longer. So say you need maybe a year or 2 years to think about what you want to do with your pet. You have that time with freezing. So it's really, freezing is the best thing. Freezers are the best. And, a lot of people find that originally they wanted full taxidermy and then they've put them in the freezer and had that extra time. Then they realize, oh, maybe that doesn't serve my needs anymore. Maybe I just want the paw preserved, or maybe I just want to bury my pet after all. So it gives people extra time to really think about what they want to do, because it's such a big decision and there's no really turning back once you make those decisions.
Right. But they shouldn't be afraid of, say, the pet is in a position to be euthanized. Should they be afraid to take it to a veterinarian to have that chemical process? Or as long as they, take the pet as soon as possible from the vet and have their ritual service and get it in the freezer, that's fine.
Yes. The drugs used in euthanasia they're not going to harm the pet in any way. So that's totally fine. And the other good thing about freezing is that your vet would also be able to keep them in their freezer. So say if you didn't have space, if you had a really large dog, your vet would likely be able to keep them at least for a couple of weeks while arrangements are made with an alternative preservationist or memorialist, whatever it is that you want to do, so that you have that extra time.
And I guess with a warning of this might be graphic to anyone who's listening, can you give us a high level of the process that happens once the pet does get to you? And let's just say it's a full taxidermy.
Okay.
How does that process go?
First, the family arrives and they bring their loved one. And usually I used to have a private funeral parlor in our home. But since COVID, I've moved everything outdoors. So I have a little table set up outside where we can have flowers and candles. And then I get to learn a little bit more about the pet. It always helps when people tell me stories about their loved ones, so I can really get an idea about who I'm working with. Because those things it's interesting how they do change the outcome of the project.
Well, even because some pets have a really distinct personality, and maybe that there's something that they did all the time that you can then incorporate somehow into your work. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So they'll arrive, and then once family leaves, I'll take their pet and wrap them up and place them in the freezer. I have 4 large chest freezers and they're all organized. I have a cat freezer and I have a dog freezer. And then I have a littles freezer, which are like that's where I usually keep lots of little guys, like small birds and hamsters and things like that. And once they're there, that's when I start making the plans to do the preservation. So I'm looking at lots of reference photos of the loved one in life to study their anatomy, essentially, especially of the facial area, because that's the part that's really has all the life and personality in it. From there, the way taxidermy works is the animal is thawed. So after being in the freezer, they're taken out overnight and left to thaw. And the next day I'll go in the studio, and it's a very, very careful process of removing the skin from the body. So I carefully open up just the skin, usually on the back or on the chest and tummy area. And I peel that skin off. It's almost like a jumpsuit, and it all just kind of folds off. And then we have to prep the skin for tanning. And tanning essentially is leather making. So that's how the skin is preserved. And while the skin is being preserved, that's when we're working on the taxidermy form, which is essentially a custom sculpture based on the anatomy of each animal. So we take measurements of the torso, of the leg length, of the length of the tail, the width of the tail, how it tapers. Everything is taken into consideration in the final reworking. So we make this new structure, this new sculpture, and it's usually made. Taxidermy is interesting because it's been around for a while, for about 200 years. Traditional taxidermy's been around. And it hasn't changed all that much. Really, the only thing that's changed are the materials. So back in the day, the whole skeleton would be cleaned and then rearticulated, and new muscles would be sculpted on, and then the skin would be put over that. In modern times, we're using a lot of foams, so like polyurethane sculptable foam, and we're using wood wool, which is a very traditional material. So it's just kind of that. They use it to pack gift baskets and things. You've probably seen it.
Mm-hmm.
We use that. We use wire, clays, epoxies. And then once the final sculpture, the recreation is made, that's when we're able to fit the skin that's been preserved over that new form again. So the bones, the muscle, organs, none of that is inside of taxidermy. It's all taken out and it's rebuilt. So essentially we are taking apart an animal and then putting it all back together again. So it's a very time intensive and laborious process.
I was going to say, about like for an average house cat, let's say, how much time from start to finish does a project like that take?
For me to be comfortable and to be able to take my time, I usually tell people with all the other loved ones in my care about a year. But if I was just focusing on one animal, if I had nothing else on my plate and I was just focusing on one pet, I would be able to have them done in around a month, something like that.
Wow, gosh. And some people don't necessarily want the full taxidermy. You offer just a paw and skull also. Do you do that?
Yes, that's probably the most common request I receive is for skull cleaning. So just the skull is removed and cleaned, and the rest of the body we usually cremate. So I offer 2 different types of cremation services. I do traditional cremation, which is what you're used to, the flame type of cremation. And then I'm also very proud to be able to offer water cremation through my wonderful partners at Paws and Claws in Orange. And water cremation is a whole new, beautiful disposition method it's legal for humans now too. So you're going to be seeing it popping up more and more.
Wow. And can you high level that process for us a little bit?
Yeah. So water cremation, or it's also called aquamation or alkaline hydrolysis. And it's this very fancy chemical process that's actually not so fancy. So it's this really big machine. It's a big stainless steel metal machine, and you load it with your organic material, whether that's a dead body or many dead bodies. And the machine fills with water and alkali, which breaks the body down over, I believe it's about a 24-hour process that they're in the machine. And it's amazing when you open this machine after the process has finished, all you see inside these individual baskets are the skeletal remains, because that's all that's left. And it's so gentle that the whole skeleton almost looks intact. The only thing, though, is that the bones become brittle and soft because they've been in that water and alkali mixture. So we'll lift them out, and then usually they kind of break, but it's really beautiful because a lot of people prefer the bones or the cremains to look as bone-like as possible. So a lot of times we'll just leave the bone fragments as is versus pulverizing them into the ash that we're used to getting. So every type of cremation service, whether that's flame or water, all that you're really getting back in that urn is bone fragments that have been processed further.
And I can totally just see how different that is, the thought of just burning something versus the thought of something just kind of gently wearing away in a chemical or water process. Yeah.
Wow. It's what I want for myself now. I'm for sure, I have it in writing. When I die, I want to be water cremated, and I want my remains to be left as intact as possible and put in this beautiful glass casket so I can be admired for years to come. And since I have my own pets, my own loved ones that I would like to preserve, and I think it'd be wonderful if we could all be together forever in some kind of little mausoleum or ossuary, like I am working on as well. But I can get into the ossuary later if you want.
Okay. Have you had an opportunity to work this taxidermy process on any kind of desert creature that not necessarily was someone's pet?
I actually haven't. I'm so entrenched in domestic pet work that I still have not. I was approached by the High Desert Nature Museum to work with them. And then I told them, I was like, I'm so backlogged that I can't. I just don't have the time. And I would love to work with them and have a piece that I've made in a museum. I think that would be such an honor, but I've created a monster. So I'm so backlogged with pet work. I don't know if I'll ever have time.
Goodness. So I heard when you were talking about the process, you were saying do you have some assistants that work with you at this point? Do you have interns or?
Yeah, usually I do have apprentices, but unfortunately with COVID, none of us have been comfortable with us being in a tiny cramped studio together. So it's been a little tough since then. So mostly right now it's just me, and I hire my sister as an apprentice. So for example, if sometimes people don't want to make the drive all the way out to the desert to bring their loved one, especially after such a taxing time, like driving for 3 hours is not what people want to do. So in that case, I do offer pickup services. So I'll hire my sister to go drive to San Diego or LA to make pickups.
Do you find people find you from out of state also?
Yeah. I work with clients from all over the country. Wow. So, but especially since COVID and since shipping's been weird and since I've been so backlogged, what I've been doing is referring folks to alternative preservationists that are closer to them logistically. Just because in the past we have shipped pets. So, I've gotten pets from New York, but it's stressful. It's stressful for the family. Yeah. It's stressful for me. And it's very expensive. You're basically buying airfare for your loved one. And it usually, if it's just, for example, a 16-pound cat overnight on ice is probably going to run close to $900.
Holy smokes. Wow.
So that's why I try to do my best just to refer people to people closer by, especially when people say, oh, I live in Florida. And I go, oh my gosh, well, there's 2 amazing bone preservationists in Florida that I would love to refer you to. So it helps to we have a very tight knit community of other people that do these kind of things. So very fortunate to be able to have others to refer people to.
Right. Do you feel like moving your practice here to the desert has changed it in any way for you?
For me, yes. And honestly, since moving the viewing, and I would call it usually a viewing space or funeral parlor, but now since that is outside, the receiving area, I guess I would call it. Now that it's been outdoors, I'm thinking to myself, this is such a beautiful environment and the weather is good almost all year round. Why don't I have a permanent altar set up outside so we can do this outdoors? So now I'm shifting that. And I think that's something that I definitely want to have versus this is actually the indoor funeral parlor.
Oh, right. So
it's kind of messy. So usually people sit here.
Right.
And then this is the very messy table that I'm using to work right now. But usually this would be where we would set up pets and their family would be able to take photos and kind of just have more time with them and
have those moments. Yeah.
Have some privacy too. Yeah.
So, well, that's wonderful that you even offer that as part of it. It's not just a drop your pet off and I'll take care of it. It's a whole ritual of they've already kind of said goodbye, but now it's
another goodbye. And then it's another hello when they get whatever preservation that they wanted back.
Right. Would you say most people that receive their pet back this way are just thrilled to have that memory?
Yeah. Most of them are. It is hard though, because I think some people don't think about what it's going to be like when they're actually getting the item back So, sometimes I have a few pets that I've completely preserved. They're completely paid for, but the family won't come pick them up. And I understand it's, gosh, I can't, I can imagine that it's just reopening this terrible chapter, and it's too painful for some people to revisit that. And then I have some people that will come to me. It's been like a year since I'd finished their loved one, and then they finally say, I'm ready to come get them.
Aww.
And then when they get them back, they go, I don't know why I didn't come sooner. This is fine. Like, I feel fine. So, I think people psych themselves out for it, though. And I do too, because I don't know how I'm going to react when I preserve my own loved ones. I've kept the bones of a few of I used to have pet rats. And so I kept their bones. But for my dogs, I want to do something a little more grand, like some kind of taxidermy or full skeletal articulation. And it's going to be tough. I don't even know if I'm going to be able to do it, or if I'm going to have to go to a colleague to get help.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Yeah, I guess we all never know until we're actually in the situation.
Yeah, you don't. So I have no idea how I'm going to be. I'm just thankful to know that I have the freezer and I'll be able to put her there and have some time. And, I have some clients that have reached out to me. They go, you know what? I think I'm just going to keep my pet in the freezer long term. And I go, that's fine. I had a art history teacher that kept her dead cat in her freezer and would take it out once a year to do this post-mortem drawing session of her cat once a year. And I thought that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So
like that, just that recognition and memorialization, as you say. Yeah. Are you planning to expand your studio once COVID is over so that you can bring in help? And then do you have any future plans for your business?
Yes. I mean, I would love to have help. I try to get my mom to quit her job all the time and come help me. It's a process one day. Anytime my sister or mom are like complaining to me about something or their work, I say, just move to the desert and come clean bones with me. Everything will work out. But it's growing, and my long-term goal is to establish a by donation pet cemetery out here in the desert. And to house my ossuary or ossuaries there. And an ossuary is basically a bone chapel. So like I was saying, I get a lot of loved ones that are left behind. Sometimes people change their mind and say, you know what, can you just keep the bones? I don't want them. I say, since I have all these bones and pieces left behind, I want someplace special to house them permanently. And so my idea was to build an ossuary, so this bone chapel where the bones and other preservations can stay and rest for perpetuity in a sacred place. So the pet owners can even come and visit their loved ones once they're finished and on display. So a lot of people are starting to donate, like say, I want to donate my cat's skull to your ossuary, and I would just like the paw cleaned. So it's interesting. We do all kinds of stuff, and I'm just hoping that eventually I'll be able to create this beautiful outdoor cemetery space for the community out here, as well as the whole Southern California community.
That's wonderful. And I can't think of a better place for it to be, because it is so beautiful and peaceful and serene. It just suits that.
I think so too. And it just felt very organic. And when I had the idea, it was like, this is the perfect place for it.
Yeah. So you've got lots to do.
Yeah. A lot.
Again, thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate it. But before I let you go, I'm going to ask you a few questions for Diary Unlocked. If you're listening for the first time, Diary Unlocked is content that's exclusively available to Patreon supporters of the Desert Lady Diaries podcast. We'll be asking Lauren for questions, and her answers will be available. If you're interested in hearing Lauren's answers to these questions, you can go out to desertladydiaries.com and click on the Patreon option. So let's see what we have here for you. Let's get these numbers. So the first question for Lauren will be, is this the life you thought you'd have when you were a teenager? What's your favorite fairy tale or childhood book? What's one of the scariest things you've ever done? And do you have any tattoos? Why or why not? what and why did you get it? And if you have multiple, what is a favorite? So again, if you want to hear Lauren's answers to those questions, go to desertladydiaries.com, click on the support page, and sign up to become a patron of the podcast. Lauren Kane, I was almost in tears a couple of times because I've had a few pets that have passed, and I think anybody who has would really appreciate knowing that this kind of service is available. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you too. Thank you so much for seeing this work. Thank you.
About a month ago, I was approached by the producers of Visit California to be interviewed for their California Now podcast, and the episode was about 3 California podcasts you should know. The other 2 podcasts that were featured were WDFM, which features Walt Disney audio recordings that tell fascinating stories about the man behind the mouse, and Bay Curious, which covers some of the quirkier aspects of the Bay Area. If you'd like to listen to that episode or any other episodes that they have, go to visitcalifornia.com/podcasts and look for the black and white photo of Walt Disney. If you're enjoying this podcast, I hope you'll subscribe and share it with a friend. Thanks so much for listening.